Most of you already know that I mainly stick to bad books because they make for the best sarcastic commentary. But if you don't know that, hello, I'm Contation Points and I read bad books and make fun of them. Now, when I'm not doing book snark, I tend to stick to fanfiction, but I've been in a weird fanfic reading slump and nothing was really calling to me. I decided to read some actual books, for pleasure. And you would not believe this, but I actually found a book that's worthy of me calling it a 5-star book. It's called Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. And the fact that I can't even remember when the last time I actually gave a 5-star rating should speak volumes, mainly because I'm not doing an awful lot of independent reading if I can't be sarcastic about it. The book opens up on a TV series as it's wrapping up the final episode. One of our two main characters is a star of this show, which is basically a cheap Game of Thrones meets the Roman version of Percy Jackson. What this show is about isn't overly important, but the TV show itself is. Marcus was hired for the role simply to stand around and look hot while flexing. He is intelligent, but most people don't actually know that, if only because he's since adopted the persona of being an empty-headed himbo to get out of doing interviews. He also has a secret. He started writing fanfiction in response to the increasingly poor scripts given to them as the series went on. He's in an online community for his own TV series where he has friends who don't know his identity. There he is only known as Book Aeneas Would Never, or BAWN. His username is a commentary not only on the TV series being untrue to the source material book series, but also of his own character on the show. The other character is April, a geologist who has always felt the need to hide her inner geek, but as she's moving to a new job in a new part of California, she feels like she no longer needs to hide this. Her username is Unapologetic Lavinia Stan, or Ulcie, as BAWN is known to call her. The two of them are close in their group, often beta reading for each other, or for those of you not in the fanfiction world, proofreading. And the first time that April name-dropped AO3, I mentally started chanting, "One of us! One of us!" This is the kind of book that I didn't even know that I'd been looking for, honestly. How can I read fanfiction without it being actual fanfiction? As I was scrolling through some of the reviews on Goodreads right now, a lot of the negative reviews said that Marcus was originally Nikolai Coster-Waldau, however that's pronounced, from Game of Thrones fame, and I guess that I'm not that in touch with Game of Thrones because I somehow missed it. And I feel like if you also don't know Game of Thrones, then it'll be a reference that'll just fly right over your head. That being said, I kind of got the feeling that it was a thinly veiled real person fic, but not necessarily for who. Longtime fans of mine will remember that I once read something similar for Tumblr, the After series by Anna Todd. It was a popular One Direction real person fanfic that somehow got published after some quick name changes and then ended up becoming a movie. And you're probably wondering what the difference is between 1-star After series and 5-star Spoiler Alert. I mean, I could probably sit here and talk all day about the After series, but this is a review for Spoiler Alert, so I think that what it really boils down to is that this book was fun. The author was having fun with it. Right before I started reading Spoiler Alert, I read a Marriage of Convenience story called The Marriage Bargain, and on the surface, I do like all of the tropes presented in Marriage Bargain. He has to get married to complete the requirements of this will. He finds his wife pretty, she finds him attractive, but the problem was that Marriage Bargain wasn't very fun. It wasn't awful, but something insanely mediocre. It was like the author wanted to jot something out quickly, wrote down a bunch of tropes and the things she wanted to hit upon, and then never once strayed. Never once had a bit of a laugh over the situation that the characters found themselves in. But the entire setup of Spoiler Alert is Marcus rushing to help a fan getting fat-shamed on Twitter, him feeling bad for her, them going out, and then him realizing that April was his best friend online, Ulcie. People on Twitter and on the forum were commenting that the entire thing was a setup like a fanfic, and at one point April even mentioned that character from the show goes on a date with a fan after meeting on Twitter became a popular modern-day AU in the fandom. That's alternate universe for those who aren't playing at home. Plus, at the end of every chapter, there would be either snippets of conversation between Ulcie and BAWN, snippets of fanfic, or snippets of movie scripts. The latter were usually insanely bad to the point of them being funny. I think my favorite was the Unicycle Gang. However, that's not to say that the entire book was just inside jokes and thinly veiled references. There was a lot more emotional stuff, too. As the story gets going, we find out more about Marcus's background. He was born to two teachers, but when his dyslexia became apparent when he started school, his mother decided to pull him out and start homeschooling him. However, rather than to offer him the treatments needed for his disability or ways to work around it, they instead treated him like he was deficient because anybody can read this in 20 minutes, so why can't you? And I really hope that I don't have to spell it out for you, that when you tell somebody every day of most of their lives that they are stupid, it starts to have an intense emotional toll on them. Marcus was able to overcome his disability enough to become an actor, which requires a lot of reading scripts. But even as his career took off, his parents had nothing but scorn for him and the role he was given. April also comes from a toxic family situation, but in a much different way. See, April is fat, which is something that she herself says on many occasions. She almost broke up with Marcus after a second date because he was talking about the things he enjoys, which is working out and eating a healthy breakfast. But as the relationship progresses, it becomes more of a thing about accepting people for who they are and not wanting to change them in any way. Which, getting back to my earlier topic of differences between after and spoiler alert, this is kind of a big thing because April and Marcus are both adults in their late 30s and early 40s respectively. They have full and rich lives and hobbies that aren't tied to a romantic partner and don't feel the need to be in a relationship. Neither is their self-worth tied up in their romantic partner's validation. Yes, having your lover say that they like your body is nice, but April's self-worth was just fine before Marcus came into her life. But as April's own subplot progressed, we learn that her father has image issues, not so much about his own, but rather for the company that he keeps. He refused to be seen out in public with his wife after she gave birth to April, which encouraged his wife to lose the baby weight. And when April herself started getting fatter and fatter, his interest in his own daughter became non-existent. And it's that same kind of situation with Marcus and his parents, that when your parents tell you day after day that there's something wrong with you, why can't you lose weight, and your self-esteem takes a serious nosedive. And I think that a big part of why this is a 5-star book is that at one point April puts her foot down with her mother. She says it is bad enough that the father has his wife so brainwashed into thinking that she needs to be skinny, but when the mother turns around and starts shaming their daughter, claiming that April's father might love her again if only she was skinny, well, I say this a lot in response to the GLBT plus crowd, but if your love comes with terms and conditions, then that's not love. And then, inspired by April's move to cut her toxic family from her life, Marcus also writes to his parents and tells them that he's never felt good enough for their lofty standards, nor have they ever once tried to actually understand or actually help their son, and he doesn't really want to hear from them again. And the entire thing is that Matilda message, that just because somebody is your family doesn't mean that you shouldn't cut them out for being awful, and I really appreciate that in this book, especially considering the toxic levels of both sets of parents. The main problem of the book focused on how Marcus wrote fanfics, but he never told April about it. She confessed about her hobby during their first date, so he knew that she was his online friend the entire time. But Marcus built his career on being this empty-headed himbo and felt like people finding out that he was well-educated would ruin his career. And what's worse is that if the showrunners found out about his fanfic writing, he could get blacklisted in the showbiz world. He had originally not told April about his online identity if only to protect himself, but when April figured out on their third date and called him out on it, there wasn't exactly a whole lot of reason for him to continue to hide it from her if only to amp up the drama. But you know that it would eventually come to it. She does figure it out. And when he lets slip something that she decided not to tell him, that she'd gone out with a lot of guys who'd shamed her for being fat. But she didn't want to let her body image issues define her relationship with Marcus, so she'd never told him. She'd mentioned it to her online friend BAWN, but more of complaining about how awful that men could be. This naturally leads to a temporary breakup in which both parties are insanely miserable, but April felt as if it was necessary if only because she felt like he'd lied to her about it and that he might have used insider information to get closer to her. The book ends with the convention for the TV series. One of Marcus's co-stars and friends finally gets ticked off about the poor behavior of the showrunners, During a question and answer panel, Alex tells everybody that he writes fanfic featuring his character from the show as a way to try and correct what was done to his character. I'll give you 3 guesses how Alex learned about fanfic, and the first 2 don't count. Not only was Alex writing about his character, but he was also placing his character into a modern-day AU, where he was making thinly veiled commentary about how awful that the showrunners and series writers were. However, the resulting negative backlash following this was eye-opening for April. As Alex faced lawsuits for leaking information, she began to question Marcus's own motives for hiding his online identity from her, and they have their kiss and make up at the end. Overall, I think that the main takeaway from this is pretty much just, yes, you can write tropes, especially the tired ones, but the important thing is to not make your trope-filled story seem like you're just going down a checklist in the hopes of getting a check after you've published your story. And I think that it's also important to write leads in a romantic novel whose entire identities aren't completely and utterly tied up with the other person. This is a fairly new series, and spoiler alert, only came out in October 2020. The second book, which, as I predicted, reading about Alex and Lauren, is going to follow the 2 of them. It's going to come out later this year, but who knows. Either way, I'm going to be keeping an eye on Olivia Dade.